It's Friday, May 24th, 2013. We are at the Dallas Museum of Art in Dallas, Texas. The following interview is part of the DMA's History of Contemporary Art Collecting in Dallas research project funded by the Texas Fund for Curatorial Research. I am Leigh Arnold, project researcher at the DMA, and I will be speaking with Susan K. Grant, professor of visual art and photography at the Texas Women's University in Denton, Texas. Thank you, Susan, for agreeing to be part of this interview.
You're welcome. It's great to be here.
Good. We can go ahead. I just want to start at the beginning, and maybe you can tell us what brought you to Texas.
Well, Texas Women's University brought me to Texas. I was hired to head the photography, and actually I came with graphic design and photography. I was teaching both. Mm-hmm. And they told me at the time whichever area grew faster was where they would put my concentration. So eventually photography, we built the photography program, and I no longer taught graphic design and began teaching photo and running that program.
And that was in?
1981.
Okay.
And when I came, there was no there was no graduate MFA in photography. Mm-hmm. So I spent the first couple years developing, writing all the paperwork that you had to do to get that established, and we established that.
Great. And what were you doing before 1981?
Before 1981, I taught 2 years at Wayne State University in Detroit, Michigan. Mm-hmm. And then before that, I was at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where I received my graduate work and undergraduate work in photography and book arts.
Okay. And how did that work out? How did Texas Women's University hear about you, or did you reach out to them for that position?
Well, I was in Detroit. It was during kind of the big auto bust, and the economy was really bad. A lot of us, had positions that weren't going to be renewed, and I just sent out a lot of applications. Mm-hmm. It's funny because I actually interviewed with UTA, UNT, and TWU at College Art Association, mm-hmm. and I really didn't want to come to Texas. I actually thought I was going to Boston. That was kind of where I was going. And then I flew here for the interview, and at TWU, we were out of the art building at the time. They were renovating the art building, mm-hmm. and the people were just really friendly, really nice, and they gave me a lot of money to build a whole program, and we bought all new photography equipment. Mm-hmm. I worked with Carolyn Brown, who was the photography person at the time, and eventually, we set up a whole new color darkroom, a whole new black and white darkroom, and I don't know, it just was really a great opportunity. Mm-hmm. Carlotta Corcoran taught photography there, mm-hmm. who was a very well-known photographer. I really didn't know anything about TWU. I did a little research, and I don't know, there was something about it. I'd never even thought about teaching at a women's university. At the time, it was single gender, mm-hmm. Undergrad, and there were graduate students, male graduate students, but not very many that were allowed in, there weren't any in the art department at the time. Mm-hmm. And it seemed like a really great opportunity. I've never left.
Well, that leads me to a follow-up question. Did you have preconceived notions of Dallas or Texas, and maybe what were they before you moved here?
Oh, do I have to censor that? I thought I would get off the plane and there would be tumbleweeds, and it was in the middle of nowhere, and I didn't really know anything about Texas, and especially not the art scene, mm-hmm. at all. Mm-hmm. And Denton was a really small town. When I interviewed, they told me I had to live there, and I basically told them that I really wasn't interested in living there, and then they, decided that originally they said all the faculty had to live in Denton, and I grew up in a really small town. I really didn't want to live in a small town. Mm-hmm. And so when I moved here, I, lived in Dallas, and I guess that was my preconceived idea. I had also didn't know that much about women's universities. Mm-hmm. Of course, before the interview and after the interview, I did a lot of research, just kind of get familiar with, that whole idea of the pedagogy of women only, and mm-hmm. I really embraced it. I really loved it. I loved the idea. Mm-hmm. The things that I discovered in teaching there really couldn't happen in other classroom situations, in my opinion, and mm-hmm. I really saw it as a challenge,
It almost seems appropriate to you, because your early work, and even maybe still, dealt a lot with issues of feminism and gender mm-hmm. relations. So was that any kind of a factor in either making the work as a result of teaching at TWU, or was there any relationship between your work and the fact that you were teaching at a women's only college?
Well, you know, it was interesting to sort of think about, because my work prior to that was always about gender battles, and like since I was really young, and in college even, I took like the first women's studies program was at University of Wisconsin-Madison. So I did a lot of studies, a lot of research on, you know, women in the arts, and I've just always been an advocate for equality and equal voice. And I noticed in coming to Texas, women were treated very differently than in the North, and it was almost more of a protective sort of way that women were treated. And I didn't see equal voice, and I didn't see equal treatment of men and women artists especially. And maybe a lot of the women that were coming to our university were women that who had families or other careers, and were now coming back to the arts because it was something that they always wanted to do, but they had been encouraged to do something else. So I don't know. I think that it maybe affected my work, but I also think that it was directly aligned with my work in sort of a funny way. Like, I guess I would have thought I was going to, like maybe if I went to a university that was really established as a women's, you know, college, TWU, though it was called Texas Women's University, it didn't have a women's studies department until just very recently. So maybe if we looked back at the history, it was a safe place for women to go to school because they weren't allowed an education in those days. And maybe some of that philosophy was still there. And I don't know, is that making any sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm like also trying to say it kind of diplomatically. I don't know. You're going to edit that part, I think.
No, it's great. Thank you. So I liked the fact that you were kind of adamantly opposed to living in Denton, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about your early places where you lived in Dallas.
Oh, okay.
And why you chose them, or maybe they chose you.
Okay.
I don't know.
Well, this is my memory. Like, I came down here, I was hired, I came down here in the middle of the summer. It wasn't too hot yet, and I rented a car. And as you probably know about Dallas, is like, there's no grid. There's like, the streets, like, you'll be driving along, it turns into a totally different street, like Wycliffe to, you know.
Yeah.
And I remember just pulling over and crying. Like, I was lost all the time. I'd have these maps. Of course, we didn't have any digital technology, and I don't know, I just like drove around and I kept looking like, where's some artists around here? And there were no places, you know, there were no places. And so I ended up living over by Fitzhugh and, what was that street? Travis and Fitzhugh. I lived in a little duplex on Travis and Fitzhugh, upstairs duplex. And in all the places I had lived prior to that, I always took over, I would try to find a place that had the biggest living room possible, because that would always be my studio. And then my living room would be in the second bedroom, and then I'd usually have another bedroom. So in this place, it was a 2-bedroom apartment, and I had the whole like living room was my studio, but the second bedroom was my darkroom. I had a 5-foot stainless steel darkroom sink. And I, you know, did all my black and white processing at the time. I did all black and white photography at that time. So, and that was a nice neighborhood. I mean, you could walk around a little bit, but I didn't live there that long. I guess I lived there for, I didn't look up that date. You'll flash my date on there. On that one, right?
Right.
I think 81, 2, 3, 4. I think I lived there 2 years. And then immediately when I got here, I found 500X. And I just felt so, oh my God, there's hope after all in Texas, that there's some artist somewhere. And so I joined 500X, I think in 1981, 82. And then I was president of 500X for 3 years. And around, I'd have to look up the date, but I think it was 84, I moved to Deep Ellum. And of course, it wasn't Deep Ellum then, and it was illegal to live there. And my studio was in an old ice factory, which is now torn down. And I lived in the upstairs, and I'd walk through their offices to go to the upstairs to my place, and I would answer the telephone like a business from 9 to 5 because, you know, it wasn't zoned residential at the time. And You know, it was a nasty, rundown, dirty neighborhood, but it was the only place really that you could find affordable space to work, because I needed a studio and a dark room, and I don't know, I didn't want to live in a residential neighborhood any longer. So
were there other artists living around that area?
There were maybe 3 or 4 other artists, like Susan Magalo was down there, Harriet Hearn, I think. I'm trying to think who else. There weren't very many artists there. The Video Bar wasn't there yet. Conduit wasn't there yet. It was really, really early on. And
were you worried about crime or any? Was that a problem?
You know, I moved from Detroit. And in Detroit, where I lived, everything was bulletproof. Like, you'd go into the grocery store and you'd buy your groceries, and they put it in a bulletproof turnaround and bag it for you and put it back. Post office, you put your money down the chute for the bank. To open a bank account, you'd be behind a bulletproof case, which I did a lot of artist, pieces about that danger. So to me, like, that neighborhood was like a piece of cake. I mean, it looked like really safe, to me. My parents, on the other hand, when they came to visit, my dad wouldn't get out of his car. And my mother came up to my studio and, oh yeah, this is nice. I said, like, where's Dad? She's like, well, he's not, he drove a Cadillac, at the time. He goes, he's not getting out of his car. He's not coming up here, I hate to tell you. So, I mean, to the innocent bystanders, it was a dangerous neighborhood. But I don't know, I never had any criminal activity done to me in that neighborhood. I was held up at gunpoint in Detroit. Oh, wow. I mean, that was a dangerous place, in my opinion. I think that the Deep Ellum area and where my studio is now were crimes of opportunity. People, street people walking by, if they'd see something that they could steal, they would steal it. But it just, it wasn't pretty looking, and I think that's why everyone was so afraid of it. That it was just rundown warehouses and no restaurants or anything.
But you kind of lived through and witnessed the gentrification of Deep Ellum, right? I mean, you've been a resident of Deep Ellum kind of ever since?
Well, I lived at the ice factory until 1988, 87, 88, something like that. And then a lot of the artists were, by then, the galleries, restaurants were moving in. A lot of the artists started moving out because, of course, the developers came in and were raising rents, et cetera. And my family really wanted me to, invest in something and move out. And of course, I invested in a warehouse space. So I moved to the Cedars area, which also wasn't developed at the time at all, in '88. There was one other loft there, which was Coombs Bridge. Bennett Miller. Actually, Bennett Miller just died last week. Do you know Bennett Miller? Bennett Miller was really responsible for loft living in Dallas. He developed the very first loft building, and that was Coombs Bridge. And then he also developed the building that I bought into, and we each bought separate, just like a raw space that had electrical wire and plumbing running to it, and then you just, finished it out however you wanted to. But it was, for the time, very affordable. It seemed like a huge amount of money to me, but it was affordable space that was open space. I was doing a lot of setup photographs, so I needed a space that I could put up a big backdrop and put up a big camera stand. So I actually left Deep Ellum in '87 and was still involved, in the gallery scene. I showed at DW Gallery when it was in Deep Ellum. And then I moved back to Deep Ellum just 6 years ago. My residence is right by 500X, which is kind of funny because it's like this circle of where I came, and I was so active at the gallery, and then now I live there, and I still love that neighborhood. I was really interested to see your research in the beginning of that neighborhood, which I kind of knew was always an art. I didn't know that it had that ripe of a history all the way back, that far back, which is really cool. Yeah,
definitely. So I was wondering if you could describe for us maybe the art scene in Dallas when you arrived in 1981. I mean, you've already mentioned that you drove around looking.
Where's all the artists?
Yeah.
Oh gosh, it'd be fun to find my correspondence back to my friends, because I would just write letters all the time. And I hate to say that the day, when school was out, I would leave, for the whole summer. First summer I taught in Albany at SUNY Buffalo. Went to Canada. I mean, I just would leave and go photograph somewhere for the whole summer. Have a generator. I put the generator in my car, and because I was
Will you tell
powering.
us the story about the generator?
Oh, when I moved here?
Yeah, when you bought it.
Oh, yeah. That's a really. I'm sorry, I didn't answer your question.
That's
We'll
okay,
get back to it. So, my very first paycheck. When I got here, I was so blown away by the expanse of space, like just wide open space, and the landscape, the color, sunsets, the landscape. I mean, I came from Detroit, which was, I lived right downtown in Cass Corridor, all the buildings were burnt out, like just not a beautiful picture. And when I would drive from Denton to Dallas, there were actually pastures with cows and horses in them. I mean, now it's like one big traffic jam, but then it was like wide open space. And I just remember being really taken by that space. And I started doing color photography as soon as I got here. I taught myself how to use a view camera and do color with the help of course, some other photographers in town. And so I wanted to photograph outdoors at that 15-minute time when the sun's going down, and it's this beautiful cobalt blue landscape. And if you put artificial light against that landscape, it really exaggerates those colors. And so I knew if I could power tungsten lights, hot lights, which is what I always used to photograph with, I could do some really cool stuff. And so I got this harebrained idea that I needed a generator to do that. So I did all this research. I found this place that sold a generator that would fit in the trunk of my car. And so I called them up, and I took my very first paycheck, and I went and bought that generator. And when I bought the generator, I went there, and the guy was like looking at it, like writing the check and all that. He goes, "So, are you picking this up for your boss?" And I said, "No, it's for me. Like, I'm an artist. I'm going to power electricity out in the landscape and make photographs." And he just was like so shocked. And he looked at me and goes, "Well, honey, most girls," I shouldn't be so cynical, but most girls would buy a new dress with that kind of money. You're buying a generator. And I just struck me so.
Welcome to Texas.
Welcome to Texas, yeah. So I bought the generator. I was like really, really thrilled. And I did a whole body of work, autobiographic dramas using that generator. I drove to Canada with that generator and just, photographed all the time with it. So.
Okay, so you would take off for the summers. So during the year, what was going on in Dallas, and how did you get involved with the arts community?
With the arts community? I think I remember in the beginning just not knowing anybody. And I think when I very first arrived here, like within maybe weeks or somewhere, I have to look at the dates, but I have this memory that Toxic Shock had a opening. I think it was at City Hall. I don't even know what that show was, what year that was.
There was this group show at City Hall, and one of their very first pieces was in 81 or 82, and it's Equipoise, and it's that circular floor piece where it's kind of puzzle pieces.
So I remember meeting them, and I thought, oh my God, there is hope. and I became really good friends with all of the women in Toxic Shock. It was really by joining 500X. Like I just knew that because I was in a new city, I didn't know anybody. I was so young. I was in my 20s, and the university I knew wasn't going to provide that kind of a space for me, that kind of camaraderie that I really wanted in the art scene. And so I got really involved at 500X. And of course there were other, eventually there were other galleries that, started opening and stuff. Of course there was Delahunty and all the other, really great galleries at the time. But I always described it to my friends that Dallas had an underground art scene that wasn't visible as a innocent bystander coming into the community. It wasn't there, but once you really saw it and got to know people, there really was a hardcore, I think, group of people. Working in a collaborative, co-op gallery like 500X, you really work as a team together. You work and fight as a team. It takes a lot to run that space, and it's really amazing that they're still there, because it takes a lot to
Who were
continue.
some of the members that were active
At the
during
time?
your tenure?
Oh my God. Greg Metz, Francis Bagley, P.M. Summer, Dennis Scharnberg. Oh my God, I could go on and on.
What were some of the shows that
Gary
you remember?
Monroe, Joe Havel. Say it again.
Some of the exhibitions maybe that you remember from that.
From 500X?
Either you were in or you just remember seeing and being.
I had a show, a group show with Joe Havel. I remember that. I curated a show for them that was called Censored. And the Censored show, I did all this research to find out, because I noticed that Texas was really conservative. And I noticed that a lot of times, like, work that didn't seem very controversial to me was controversial here. And so I was really curious to see, like, what was the issue with censorship in the arts. And so I did this research to find out, you know, in the area, what artists had been censored, why they had been censored. And I think it was related to, I was teaching for the summer, maybe this was 87 or so, 86. I was teaching at the Art Institute in Chicago for the summer, and there was a group, this group portfolio exhibition that was traveling. And they put this group portfolio up, and one of the photos in there was a photograph of photographers photographing at a nudist colony. And so you see, like, the photographer, and then you see all these, like, 56 photographers photographing these nudists. And they hung it, and at the Art Institute, let me see if I can get this right. Yeah, at the Art Institute, they all complained, everyone's complaining that that piece, you know, got censored. No, that piece should be censored, like it was really bad, it should be censored. And so then that same piece came, I can't know if I can get it right, that same piece came to Texas Women's University, and the chair of our department at the time, instead of hanging that portfolio in the gallery, she took the controversial piece and she hung it in her office. And now all of our students were complaining that it was censored. So that made me really curious to start thinking about, well, what is censorship? Why do people censor? Why not censor? And here's this very same piece people thought should be censored, and then at another space it was censored, and they were pissed off that it was censored, right? And so I just did this research, and I looked around, and I gathered all newspaper articles, anything I could find about censorship, and then I would locate the artists who did those pieces. And we showed the exhibition, in the exhibition was the piece that had been censored, and then all the written materials were on the wall next to it. And then one of the pieces was hung face to the wall, because that's how it was hung in the exhibition. This artist had gone to the show the opening night, and her piece was hung face to the wall. Oh my gosh. So that was one piece I remembered.
Do you remember who were some of the artists who had been censored?
I was going to look up I have a whole folder on it. I can't even remember now. It was too long ago.
Yeah.
But I could give it to you.
Yeah,
maybe you can flash their names. You know? But it was an interesting.
It'd be kind of funny to have the text next to it, but have it like redacted or something. So
yeah,
it's like the text has become what's
exactly.
been censored. But,
yeah.
That's really neat.
Yeah, but they're just all. There were great. There were lots of really great shows that, 5 minutes. It was like a group of artists, a really great team of artists. And if you look at all the artists that have come through 500X and where they are today, it's phenomenal.
I know, it's very impressive.
Yeah, I think it's really impressive.
Can you describe for us your work in that early period of living in Dallas? You've already mentioned that you had turned to color photography. Did that have anything to do with being in a new environment, or why the switch? And then maybe you can talk us through your kind of career development in that early period.
When I moved here, the decision to do color, I've actually been quoted in books saying I would never ever do color. And when I moved here, it was like eye candy. Like everything was so pristine, beautiful colors. The way people looked, the way people were treated, the way they acted, it just seemed right. Like I just wanted to do color. And I had already been doing fabricated realities. And so I would draw these little sketches and then go out and find all the people and props and stage a scene out in the environment and also in my studio at the same time. And I called them autobiographic dramas. They were about my observations and issues, complaints, like gender battles, inequities. I can't even say the word right now, but you know what I mean. Like, I don't know. I was interested in looking. I would keep a journal, and I would just take journal writings, and then I would fabricate these crazy scenes. I was really interested in metaphor and symbols, and it was a way to really look at violence and just the dramas in one's life. You know, it was a way to look at that through staging and through kind of cynicism. They would look like these nonsensical sort of setups, but yet at the same time, everything had a symbol, you know, behind it. And I was interested in telling sort of those stories. It was just those dramas that I pretended they were about me, but really it was about just looking at the culture in general. You know, does that give you some insight?
What were some of, if you can think of or want to describe, some of the observations you had of Texas?
Oh, gosh, that's really, I would get in trouble, I think.
I don't want to censor you, so
what were my observations? It was a really conservative and sexist. I mean, I just felt like it was a sexist and conservative environment. There wasn't a whole lot of freedom, is what I felt like, and there wasn't a whole lot of, you know, we didn't have a contemporary art museum, and what did get showed was, you know, it was safe. I think it was safe work, and I think that, you know, luckily, I started teaching in New York at the International Center for Photography, and for over 25 years, I just would travel, you know, there twice a year, every year, and I traveled a lot. I did a lot of guest lectures everywhere, and it just, I don't know, it provided me with a way to deal with Dallas in a way that I would come back here. It was a fantastic place to make work. Like you could get, I always felt like I could get a lot of work done here because there weren't so many distractions and there wasn't so much activity kind of going on. You know, back to what you're asking me about to describe a photo or maybe what some of that work was like. I remember the very first photo I made with that generator was this piece of these three women sitting on these chairs out in a field in the middle of this wide open Texas landscape with this beautiful sunset kind of behind them. They're sitting very proper, and they all have, you know, ballroom gowns on. And the title of the piece is Waiting. And the way that I would work in those times, I would take sort of a thought that I had or something someone told me or something that I read, and then I would create a scene to kind of go with that, but then also go opposed to that. So that one was from a memory my father told me one time. I was looking at colleges, and he said, well, you don't need to go to college. Like, if you just wait long enough, some nice man will come along and take care of you, and everything will be fine. You don't need that, you know. And so then when I arrived in Dallas, I also, just the way in which women, and I don't even know if I can see it anymore like, Texas has changed so much in 30 years that at the time, what was so obvious to me is that when we were treated like these delicate, like you got to take care of them, like they can't take care of themselves, and so that sort of was what I would call the ricochet in my work. Is like I'm looking at, like, that was ingrained in me when I was young, and now I'm like looking at it in the environment, and now I'm making art about it. Does that make sense? So I'm really interested in telling stories that don't have answers, in setting up maybe provocative scenes that one is like, oh, that's funny, but oh, when you look at it long enough, it's not funny at all. I was also a window designer, so I was very much into the craft of like how I could create a scene that might look real but look theatrical, nonsensical, you know, in a way. Does that help?
Yeah, no, that's great. It's interesting the way you describe how Texas was very sexist, and it probably still is in many ways. But what I've noticed in the research is there's a history of strong female presence. I mean, a lot of strong women who have started galleries. I mean, Betty Blake with her gallery in 1950, and since then, just, you know, so many women who have been active. And then, of course, DW Gallery, which is very active in Toxic Shock. So were you, I don't know even what question I'm trying to ask, but it seems as though, did you get to clue into that, or is that just represent a very small minority of the experience as a female artist in Texas?
Well, you know, it goes back to when I told you that I looked at Texas, like, okay, well, gosh, these people are really interested in me. Like, what would it be like to live in Texas? Like, what is the history of Texas? If you look back at the powerful, the icon of the cowgirl, like, there's no more power than anywhere, in my opinion, when you kind of look at that history in a way. And there's some, to me, there's a spirit of that in Texas. In a side of Texas, in my opinion, and like the women artists I know in Texas work really, really hard, and they're of great inspiration to me. And I think coming from a family where art was questioned, a culture where art's questioned, it made me work harder and say, well, I'll show you. Like, I might be a woman and I might be an artist, and this is my lifeblood, and I'll figure out how to do this. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
to me, sometimes when there's great adversity, is that the word? Adversity, it makes you work harder. And that was one of the things in building the photo program at TWU, is like one of the things I always said to my students is that, you know, we're in a little tiny town in Texas, and if you're going to get recognition, you've got to work twice as hard as everyone else, and you've got to get your work out there outside of Denton, Texas. You know, and I've always made it a point that their resumes have shows from, you know, all across the country, and they've gotten great awards and great teaching jobs, you know, because of that. But, you know, back to your question, I think about, what was your original question?
I don't even know.
It's about women artists.
Yeah, and kind of maybe a subversive or feminist, like something was going on in Dallas, and it's always kind of been under the radar, but there has always been kind of a strong female.
Yeah, I think what I would say what's going on was never for me. My experience was never in the art world. I never felt like I couldn't do something because I was a woman. I never felt like I didn't have a voice because I was a woman. I'd never felt that. I think that if I look outside of my art community, that's a whole different story.
Like the generator story.
Yeah. Oh yeah, exactly. We could go back to the generator story. Yeah, that's what I mean by yes, the sexist environment.
And it also, I talked with Sue Grays, who I kind of was asking the same question, because, you know, she was only the second contemporary curator the DMA ever had, and she's a woman. And then there was a successive, I mean, we've always had, you know, a female curator in contemporary arts, and until recently, and she said, well, it's because they only recently figured out that contemporary arts is you can make a lot of money, and it only recently became apparent that contemporary art is important. And before then, it was just kind of like, let the girls do whatever they want with the contemporary art. At least that was her response, which I was kind of like dejected, because it seemed so kind of sad to think that women were allowed to work in those positions and you know, excel and have galleries in contemporary arts only because men deemed it kind of not worthy of their attention, or not a money-making scheme or something.
You know, I've always thought about, like, my place as a female artist, is that if it's in your heart, if your passion is art, you like, it doesn't matter what your gender is, you'll figure out a way to make it.
Right.
And that, yeah, maybe there's been more opportunities for men in the arts, but I think that it's our job to make those opportunities the best that we can. And you know, I've always been an advocate for showing in a million, like when I first started, I would show my work anywhere I possibly could, any, you know, coffee house or whatever. You know, I think that that's kind of how you know, get started, and, you know, be on boards and serve on committees, and like I've always been an advocate of putting my voice forward as opposed to complaining, because complaining doesn't forward the action in a whole lot. Like, I think that it's important to be active and involved and participate in making your voice known, I guess, is the best. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Can you describe what the art program was like at TWU when you arrived, and kind of what you've accomplished in your 30 years?
When I arrived at TWU, there was no paper making and bookmaking program, and I had come from a place that had, you know, letterpress and really into artist books. That was Madison. And when I went to Detroit, I set up a program there. And when I got here, I really wanted to do the same thing there. And I got a joint grant with Corky Stuckenbrook, who just retired this year. And we set up papermaking and bookmaking. She was a papermaking side, I was a bookmaking side. God, I made a million phone calls. I finally found a press in Fort Worth that they would donate to the university. So we set up the letterpress and got all this type donated and wrote all the curriculum. And so I would say that was like one of really big thing for me, is that people here didn't really know, there wasn't much activity in book arts. And I met Alan Governor and Kalita, who were really interested in books, and Tua in boxing. They came and took my book workshop at TWU, and I would say that would be one of the biggest things that I set up there. And then I also, it was interesting because the gallery, we have 2 galleries at TWU, but there just wasn't a whole lot of, there wasn't interest from the faculty in developing shows. The gallery director would kind of decide on shows and stuff like that. And Corky Stuckenbrook was the gallery director at the time. And I can't remember how it all worked, but I went to her and I said, you know, could we bring in visiting speakers? And so I started out with photography. I brought in every person that taught photography in the area and had them talk about their work. And it was a really great way to expose my students to all the talent that was here, and also learn, you know, to kind of meet the community of photographers, a huge community of fine art photographers in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, you know. So that was really exciting. And then we started bringing in guest speakers, and every year, you know, each of the faculty, you can kind of propose a show or a lecture in your area. And I just went always for, like, you know, who are the best speakers, who are the greatest artists that I could bring in to inspire my students. And we don't have to bring in women artists, but we've kind of have concentrated on women artists. So, I mean, there's a whole great list of women speakers, you know, that we brought in. In the 80s, I was on this committee through the Federation, and we brought in the Guerrilla Girls. I wrote that grant, and I picked them up at the airport, and that's like one of my favorite things, maybe, that that
will
kind
you
of
tell
stands
that
out.
story or flesh it out a little bit?
So the Guerrilla Girls, I was in New York, and I picked up one of their flyers, and a friend of mine was a Guerrilla Girl, and I knew that they were doing speaking, you know, engagements, and so I thought, oh my God, TW, that would be awesome. And so the way that it works is, it's really funny actually. The way that it works is they you know, you have a contract with them, and then they show up, and there's not, you know, no one is allowed to know who they are, except obviously the person picking them up. And so my husband and I picked them up, and we took them to a hotel in Denton, and we checked them in as Frida Kahlo. Who was it? I just told you last night. Frida Kahlo.
Georgia O'Keeffe.
Georgia O'Keeffe. I can't remember the third one now.
I can't either.
But so we go to the hotel, and I had made their reservations, because those are their names. All the Guerrilla Girls have assumed, you know, artist names, famous artist names. And so I called and made reservation. They didn't say a word. And then when we checked them in, they're like, oh, okay, Frida Kahlo. They like wrote the whole thing. They never, like, they didn't know, you know, who that was, you know. And so then when it came time for the lecture, you know, we picked them up, and then they put on their masks, and it was a great turnout. We had, they gave a lecture at the big MCL, you know, auditorium. And I remember it was when Ann Governor was either running or had just lost for election. I can't remember. But I remember they did this thing about Ann, you know, Richards. And then we had an opening in the art department of all their posters, which was fabulous. And
yeah.
so I have these great pictures of them in their, you know, guerrilla garb.
See those.
I still find it pretty fascinating that people weren't like, who's under that mask? You know, like there wasn't this great like desire. Like they just accepted, well, those are the Guerrilla Girls. You know, the Guerrilla Girls from New York. So
yeah.
That was really fun. It was really great to see such a good turnout, and it was such an opportunity to have their posters, you know, within the art department for that month of when the show was up. So I really liked that.
So while you're teaching at TWU, what are some of the ways you got involved in the Dallas arts community?
500X was my start, and then I was active in DARE. I was active in DARE at the time where DARE was just about to go to the MAC, and then it went to the MAC.
Can you tell us more about that? I think DARE, that part of DARE is kind of a weird story, because it's not very black and white as to it was this, and then it became this, you
Yeah.
know?
I don't think I could tell you the whole real how exactly. I don't think any of us really knew how it was happening or what. Because in the beginning it was Dare at the Mac. Like you knew that phrase, right?
Yeah.
I remember when we were in a temporary space, and I think I don't even think we owned that space. I think it was a space over on Good Latimer where we did these performance nights. I remember with Greg Metz showing up, and I had my yellow gloves on and mask. And
So did you do performance?
no, I was there clean. Like that place was like, oh my God, it was like disgusting. And Greg had been, I saw him last night, and he was saying, yeah, Susan, I'd been cleaning there for 4 hours. She shows up with these yellow gloves on and a mask. And I go, what do you do? And I said, I'm cleaning the bathrooms. But he was like making this joke about how filthy it was. And I mean, it was just this disgusting, rundown, filthy, dirty warehouse that probably hadn't been open to the air for I don't know how long. And we had this great, event there.
What was the event? Do you remember?
I think it was a night of performances. I know I have in my files, I know I have the literature on it. I'm sure I do. And then I don't remember, I think when that show was at, Fair Park, I think Claude.
The biennial?
I think Claude got really interested in Dare. And then I don't remember how it all happened to get invited to be at the MAC, but I remember being at a meeting, and I think Rick Bertel had put together this group of artists. We were the artist advisory committee for that. I just remember kind of going through all those different meetings.
What about Dare did you want to get involved? I mean, what about that exact group made you want to get involved with them?
I think the same reason I mentioned before is that it was a group of like-minded artists that just were passionate about making work and being able to show their work in places where maybe most of us didn't have representation. So we were kind of what I said, making our own spaces, and just kind of getting that art scene into Dallas, getting that, I don't want to say recognition, but just making opportunities for people in Dallas to be aware that there were other artists other than just what was going on in the galleries. And it was also, I think, a lot about advocacy. There was different advocacy issues that people, were interested in the arts. I think that's what would be I think that's why we all kind of work together, to just further the whole notion about art in the culture, maybe, and educate ourselves and others, and a nice place to show and support one another in the projects that they're working on,
And where are some of the places you've shown your work in Dallas?
In Dallas? I started at 500X, then I went to DW Gallery, and then when DW closed, I guess, I did this installation. I started doing installation work and more kind of like book stuff. And so I didn't really look for a gallery for a while because I didn't have anything to sell. Like my installation work really wasn't for sale. And then after I did this big research project and started doing prints again, I really wanted to get involved in a commercial gallery again. And so I went with Conduit Gallery, and I've been there ever since. So.
What was the project that got you back into prints?
It's a project called Night Journey, and it's an ongoing project. I think I'm in the last chapter of it, though my friends will all laugh at
When was
me.
this begun?
Well, it's kind of, it's deceiving because I started it in 1993, and it was a project that I got funding for to sleep in a sleep laboratory and be awakened out of REM sleep. And the project was, I was very interested in where we go at night. And my other work was all autobiographic. I was keeping a journal, making images from that experience, and I felt like I had uncovered every square inch of my waking life, and I was just really curious about where do we go when we sleep. And it sort of came from two notions. One was I would wake up in the morning and I would still be in the residue of a dream, like that sadness or exhilaration or fear, and that would last for a while, or during the day all of a sudden something would happen. I'd think, oh my God, I dreamt that last night. So I was really interested. All my work that I create has a lot of research behind it. I love doing research. And so I started researching this whole notion of dreams and memory and access to the unconscious. And I had read somewhere that if you're awakened out of REM sleep, you have really vivid recall of that dream space. And so I was like, oh my God, I'm all over that. I would like to figure out how to do that. And I went through all these things. My husband put a tape recorder over our bed, and I would tape record, had a tape recorder underneath my pillow. I was going to work with a night DJ to call me up. And so then I said it revolved around two things. The second thing was I had this little auto recorder under my pillow. And this one day I pulled out the recorder and I thought, I haven't recorded in here for a really long time. I should listen to what I recorded last, just kind of get my head around it. And I listened to this recording, and I had no memory of the recording, nor did the voice sound like me in the recording. And that really freaked me out. And I thought, this is really fascinating. Like it doesn't even sound like me talking. So that was when I really started doing research. I really wanted to figure out how I could methodically access that space. And through my research, that was where I discovered the only way I could do that was at a sleep laboratory. So I kind of called all around, and I finally found a sleep scientist, Dr. John Herman at the Southwestern Medical School, Southwestern Medical Center, agreed to work with me. And so I got funding to sleep in his lab over a series of times, and that was in I think my first grant was 93. I applied for so many grants. We were turned down by a million grants because it was either too artistic for the art community, it was too scientific. It was too artistic for the science community, it was too scientific for the art community. And then finally my university gave me the first grant. But so the reason I said it was deceiving is I slept there in 93, and then 94 I worked on it some more, and then I got this commission from the Smithsonian to do this artist book on Madame Curie, and it's kind of a roundabout, another whole story, which I could tell you in a minute. But so I set it aside, and I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with that research yet. I had compiled all these sleep awakenings. The way it would work, I would go to the sleep laboratory, they would hook me up with electrodes. I would go in my own little bedroom and go to sleep, and then they would wake me over a loudspeaker, and they would ask me, what was the last thing you saw before we called your name? And John, he designed this methodology of questions in order to elicit visual feedback. And I wasn't so much interested in interpreting dreams, but I really wanted to see visually, what does it look like? And then based on that memory of that vision, begin attaching, emotions to it and stories to it. So then I would take those interrogation sessions, I had them all put into audio tapes put into written text, and I used those as inspiration to create the imagery. One of the things I've always done, even back when I was doing the early work, I've always been really inspired by the way language looks on paper, like written text on paper. And I've always used that as inspiration to create images. Even from my own journals, I might highlight 3 words or 2 phrases or something. And so that's what I did actually with the Dream Project. I went through and I read over all those transcripts, and I would just highlight, she told me not to touch that, or the trees were blowing, or just like little phrases. And then I would take those phrases, and I got this idea to work with shadows, because I thought shadow was a perfect metaphor for the dream state. And also, when you're wakened out of REM, you've got very vivid recall, but it dissipates as quickly as it is real. So to me, the way the shadow is like there and then gone, was a perfect kind of way to work. And also, you can't identify anyone in a shadow. The same when you're trying to recall a dream, you think that it's someone, but there's no proof. And then in a minute, you don't even think it's that person anymore. So that was sort of all the kind of story or philosophy behind using the shadow. And then when I did experiments working with shadows, I started learning what things could make really interesting shadows. I just had these 4 8-foot tables in my studio. I just covered them with props that I thought might be of interest. Sometimes they were props that were in some of the language of the dreams. Other times they were just props placed there because I thought they would be interesting. And then I would just start working on a phrase, just working on something really intuitively. My work prior to that was all pre-visualized. The dream work, I wanted it to be intuitive. So I would just, pick up a branch, put it in place, pick up something else, put it in place, and just start building these sort of what I thought were just really interesting or cool looking. I hate to say the word cool, but that's really like I'll hold something and go, oh my God, that looks awesome. I'll like put it in place and just kind of build these sets kind of organically and intuitively. I got way off the subject there
No,
with
you
you, but
didn't. Oh, I asked you to describe the project.
okay,
So you
yeah, okay,
just
so
did
that was the
very
dream
well.
project, yeah. So then, but what was interesting is, that's where I got off the track a little bit, is that, so I slept there in 93, 94, then I worked on Madame Curie, and then in 98, so I didn't start making any images from that research until 98 and 99. And here's what happened. In 98 and 99, I was on sabbatical, and my mother was in intensive care in Arizona. And I remember sitting there in her hospital room, and she had her eyes closed, and she couldn't speak anymore, but her eyes were like just moving underneath her eyelids, and she'd like move around. And sometimes I would say something, she'd like go like, grab my wrist, so I knew she could hear me. But I just started thinking to myself, what would it be like if I could see into her, like see her eyes, like see her mind working? I just started thinking about all those images in the unconscious, the images that we remember, the way they look, and I kept thinking about how I can't see those images, but I can only imagine those images, and that's where the idea of the shadow came for me. So, and then she passed away, and I went back to Dallas, and probably after, I don't know, maybe a month went by or so, and I was writing in my journal a whole lot. I was really, really sad, and I just started picking up all these images from those transcripts. I thought, okay, I'm going to work with shadows, and it was that experience that kind of kept sourcing it. So I spent that whole year, 98, 99, and then 2000 is when the installation piece opened at 5501 Columbia Art Center. I remember Alan Governor, he like booked me a spot, and he had looked at the work in progress. I kept saying, no, it's not done yet. Could I have 6 more months, and he like changed it, I think twice or something for me. And finally he called me and said, Susan, you have to take either this time or not. Like you've got to get this project done. Yeah,
because I mean, it closed not long after.
I can't remember what year it closed.
Did you say you did the installation in 2001?
2000. No, 2000.
Because I think they closed in 2001.
Oh, they did? Yeah.
So that's
yeah.
Great. So you were one of the last great
I guess
shows.
so. Yeah, I forgot that. Yeah. Yeah, so that installation opened, and then that show started traveling to different places, and Women and Their Work in Austin invited me to show that work there. And then when I got the contract, it said I couldn't hang anything from the ceiling. And I was like, well, wait a minute. So then that was when I started making prints again. And that's what we were talking about, galleries. That's how we got off that subject. But so I started making prints, and I noticed that because I couldn't hang from the ceiling, these pieces that I did were 4 by 8 foot images on chiffon, and I created this space that you walked through sort of to mimic the notion of dreaming. And I had noticed that I lost a lot of detail in those fabric pieces, and I wanted to, to me, whenever something happens that's wrong or like doesn't work, I just think, okay, well, this was meant for a reason. Now what could I do? And so that was when I just started investigating. Well, I'd never printed any of these shadow pieces on paper that way. So I just started working on some new images that would be really meant for paper, not for chiffon. And so that was the show that opened at Women and Their Work. And then I had shown that work to Nancy at Conduit, and she, really wanted to show it and represent me. And so then I started doing the paper images in 2002.
Yeah. And still working on it.
Yeah, still working on it.
Yeah. But also making video with it too.
Well, this very last part, my show at Conduit, there's 5 chapters right now, and I'm on the 6th chapter. But it also had a video element to it, and the video to me was about the memory of the dream, where the photographs are the evidence of the dream. So many of the little things that are evidenced within the paper photographs are then represented in the video, and they're moving in time and space, which to me was kind of like all about the dream, and it's like fragmented and fabricated, and you go back and forth, like you'll see something that you saw in the show, and then it moves, and then you see it in another place a different way. So that was a really interesting way to work. When I started that project, I showed it had success really early, And I showed it to a lot of different people and a couple publishers that were really interested. But everyone said, you know, to do a decent-sized book, you need 100 images to edit to 80. And so that has been my goal all this time I've been working on it, since 2002, is to get to 100 images. And the sets that I make are extremely time-consuming. I might make 4 images, 5 images a year if I'm lucky, because they're just so time-consuming, plus I teach full-time. So, so it's taken me a long time. But I'm around 78. I think I'm at 78 images. So good, it's getting there.
That's great.
Thank you.
And can you tell us about your book arts? Maybe just a few highlights. Maybe the book you made with your mother, but also I love the Marie Curie book.
The Madame Curie book,
Madame Curie book.
You know, it's interesting because there's artists, there's people in the world who know me only as a book artist. So I've always worn those 2 hats. And there's others that only know me as a photographer. And you know, those 2 worlds are kind of like really different worlds. Although I have curated an artist book show that it went to 17 venues in 4 years, and it was a look at photographic artists making artist books. I started making books at the University of Wisconsin when I was an undergrad. My very last semester I did a book, and then as a graduate student I did several more books. And the book that you're referring to, Portrait of an Artist and Her Mother, it's really a look at ageism, which I didn't intend at the time, and gender and identity. And it starts out with a little bit of stream of consciousness writing in the beginning that sort of just talks about the difference between my mother and I, and then it goes through and it documents my mother's and mine body parts, both. Well, they're nude, but it starts out with closed hands, ends with open hands, and then it shows our eyes, our ears, our lips, our breasts, torso, knees, and feet. And they're printed as 2x2 contact prints side by side with a little number, you know, the number from the film in between. It was really an interesting project in that everything I set out to do in that book, I proved myself wrong within the book, which I think as an artist is really disturbing and also really revelatory, in that I thought that I was going to show how different my mother and I were, and it was because we are different generations and just different belief systems, and everything was different. And then even when I photographed her, I never saw the similarities. And when I went back and processed the film the very first time, I did several photographs, but when I photographed the film the first time, it was like really, like, I was shocked, because our bodies are identical, except I was, 20, 30 years younger, And the most telling photo of all of it were the feet. And when I remember holding it up to the light, and I couldn't even tell her feet from my feet. And so I just sat and I wrote a whole lot about that whole experience. And it really just became this inability to see her. Like, I had never even seen her physically. Like, how, if I had I missed all that physically, there had to be a whole lot more going on in our relationship. And so that was the mother-daughter.
Which is book. Used a lot now, I think you've mentioned, and people teach with it as in gender studies courses and women's studies courses. Yeah, it's wonderful.
I mean, it was way before, this whole notion of gender and identity.
Yeah.
It was such a big conversation, I was studying in a women's studies class at the time, and the whole sort of notion behind that project was to look at how mothers and daughter artists were represented. And I had looked at all these through the arts, different examples of painters, portraying mothers and daughters, and I wanted to do some project that really showed that the rawness of it, the vulnerability of it, and quote, the truth about it, which was interesting because the photographic truth became the opposite truth of what I was trying to portray. And in fact, a really funny story is when I went to my mother and I showed her all the photographs, the contact prints. I showed her the feet photos. I said, "Mother, look, isn't this so interesting? I can't even tell your feet from my feet." She goes, "Well, your feet, those are your feet." I go, "Well, how can you tell that?" She goes, "Well, your toenail polish is chipped. Those are definitely not my feet," which is really cute and interesting.
Yeah.
So, all of my artist books are small, limited editions, usually around 20, 25 They're handmade. The paper's usually handmade, handset type, hand-bound. And that's really sort of where I made my way in the artist book world, is I've taught a lot of book workshops, teaching other people how to make books, how to design books, how to bind them, etc. The Madame Curie book that you mentioned was, that was an interesting project. It was for the Smithsonian, and I think there were 40 artists in the beginning that were invited to choose a book from the Dibner collection, which houses 200 books on the heralds of science. And you were supposed to choose a book from that collection and then do a prototype of an artist's book that you would make inspired by this famous manuscript. Well, in the 200 books of the heralds of science in the Dibner collection, only one was by a woman, and it was Marie Curie. And first of all, I found that just outrageous. And as soon as I saw that, I wanted to do that just for that reason. And also, I was always like, I wasn't very good in science, but I was always kind of curious about her life and, all of her inventions and stuff, because I maybe had learned that in school when I was young. I don't remember exactly, but so I chose that book, and I was so worried that everyone else would choose that book too. But so then you had to send in your prototypes, and then they chose 20 artists, and the books were on display with the original manuscript, which I found out later were actually facsimiles of the manuscripts at Washington Project for the Arts, and then it went to the Smithsonian for the exhibition. And the research on Madame Curie was really fascinating because it paralleled so much of my interest in the arts. Like my desire to do so much research behind my projects. I'd done a lot of other projects I haven't talked about that kind of married science, science and art. And so I read her whole dissertation. I took 50 pages of notes. I kept calling all the people in my university that could try to help me with some of the terminology, and I was having the hardest time because I wasn't good at science. And then I read a few things in there. One, I just started doing research on her life rather than just her dissertation. And there was a couple things I found fascinating with her life. One was she hated the public view. She hated being in public. She hated giving public lectures. She just wanted to work in her studio, in the laboratory, and do research. That was her main goal in life. And when she was a young scientist, before she, was discovered and before she discovered radium or isolated radium, she would use all the money that she had to pay for fuel for her lamp in her little apartment. And it was so cold, she would take all of the clothes out of her closet and put them on top of her to sleep at night to keep herself warm. And there was something about that passion and that dedication to work that I so identified with in my own practice of an artist. And then also she was, women at that time, they weren't allowed in science, and the fact that she had children really caused a problem for people. Her husband was totally dedicated to her, and when he died, she assumed his position, in teaching. But so, in reading all of this research about her life, the most fascinating book was by her daughter Eve, and I paraphrased words from Eve's book into these. I encapsulated them into these little stories in these test tubes. And the book is, it comes in a lead box. It says radioactive substances on the top, which is the title of her dissertation. And when you open it, it has 5 test tubes in it that glow in the dark. And the whole notion of book arts for me is using materials to echo the content. And you tell a story through the way the materials look, the way they feel, the way they smell, all that. And when I was reading her dissertation, there were these notes in it that she had written to this scientist called Beaumont, Beaumont was a scientist who really knew something about this quality of phosphorus or phosphorescent, I think it's called. But he didn't know what radium, no one knew what radium was. So she took some of his philosophies, and her husband was working on crystals at the time, and she and him sort of started working together. And somewhere she had given Beaumont this little glass test tube that had something in it. They didn't know what it was. And he forgot about it, and he put it in his wool vest pocket. And so in the inner dissertation, there's letters included to him from her, back and forth. And he writes her this letter, and he says, interesting thing happened the other day. I noticed that I had forgotten this test tube that you gave me, and I looked, and I noticed there was this little red dot on my skin. And then as you read through this letter, it goes on to describe how the dot gets bigger, bigger, bigger. It gets an open sore, and then a crust is over. And so like here we have, poisoning, and they don't even know it. And so that was why I did all the stories in the little test tubes. I put the stories about her life in those test tubes because of that symbol that she hated the public life. She wanted to keep her life with her husband and her children private as much as she possibly could. And then the reason they glow in the dark is that there's this description in Eve's book that she tells her mother and dad went to the laboratory. She was just little at the time. Her mother and dad went to the laboratory one night, and just before they went to open the door, Marie said, "Don't turn the lights on," because they knew something was happening, this glowing quality. They didn't know what it was. And supposedly the story goes, when they opened the door, everything was glowing this mauve color. And so that was why I made the little test tubes glow in the dark. And then when you open up the box, or those little test tubes, then there's a book in there. It looks like an old notebook, all bound in lead, has all of her research in it. And when I got to the very end of her dissertation, it's like the summary. If I had just read the summary to begin with, it would have helped a lot. But I took her summary and I divided it into Roman numerals, 10 major Roman numerals, and those are the pages, and those are juxtaposed with historic photos of her that are also image transfers on top of the lead. And I felt really good. When I went to the opening at the Smithsonian, there was, this whole panel of scientists. So scientists, all these different people there, and this one scientist, he singled out my book, and he talked about how I must have really understood the research. So, because like when you do something that's totally outside your field like that, I was designing and reacting it from an artist's point of view, inspired by that dissertation, but I didn't really know if it was right on. But he clarified that it was.
That's quite a compliment.
That he thought I'd do something about science, which I didn't. But that's good. So
That's a good
that made me
compliment.
happy. Thank you.
And that book doesn't travel very well, right? Through airports?
No. You want me to tell those stories? I think maybe I should do that someday. I should write a book about that book, because there's been so many funny things that happened about it. I'll tell you two stories. One of was, I had an artist book dealer in New York, Tony Zwicker, who's no longer with us, unfortunately. But anyway, she sold my artist books, and she called me up and she said, "Susan, I need you to send another Madame Curie book, because I've sold one." So I wrapped it all up, and it's all made out of lead. And it's, at that time, it was the price of it was $3,000. And so it would come in a little box, but I put kind of really good packing around it, but I had to insure it for $3,000. And so I go to UPS and I give it to them, and you have to fill out the paperwork, what it is. I said, well, it's a book. It's there are $3,000. We had $3,000. Okay. So I leave. I don't think anything more of it. And so then she calls me the very next day and she says, "Susan, now I've sold a second copy. I need you to send me another copy. Can you do it today?" I'm like, okay, no problem. So I get the same kind of box, wrap the whole thing up. I go back to the same UPS store, and when I get there, the same guy's at the counter. And so he starts filling out my stuff. I'm kind of filling out, give him the box. He goes, you're not shipping radioactive substances again, are you? And I was like, well, there's no, what? Like, yeah, wait a minute. Because, he never knew, when I was there the day before, I never wrote down that there weren't radioactive substances. This is the title of the book. Yeah. I go, well, how do you know there isn't radioactive substances in there, but there's a book titled Radioactive Substances. How do you know that? He said, well, I got in a lot of trouble yesterday after you left, because my supervisor thought that book was too heavy, and that $3,000 was suspicious, and so we had to open it up. And when we opened it up, we saw there were test tubes there, and it was radioactive substances. And so I said, "But did you look at it?" He goes, "No, I didn't look at that." So that was the first. Yeah. That was the first story. So then the second one, I was traveling I was going to New York to teach a workshop, and I had that book in my carry-on. And after just some other weird experiences, the Smithsonian did a really nice article on that show and that book. And so I had this, you know, the Smithsonian magazine, it said Smithsonian on it, and I would always carry that with me in case there was any problems. So it goes through security. This is pre 9/11. This will make you feel really safe. So I go through security, and of course the buzzer goes off, and I go over to my bag, and I said, there's a lead book in here, and I went to reach, you know, to show him, and the guy goes, don't touch that bag, ma'am, don't touch that bag. I go, yeah, okay, no problem. I said, I'm trying to tell you that you're going to find a lead book in there. It's in a lead box. It looks dangerous. It isn't. It's just an artist book, and here's a little article in there on it, you know. So then he goes, I'm going to have to get, I've got to get my supervisor for this. So he rings some buzzer, and so now this other person comes with this clipboard, and this woman, she has like really long, you know, fingernails on, and I go, she goes, what is this? I said, this really isn't what it looks like. It looks like a dangerous thing. There's no radioactive substances involved. It's an artist book, and so she goes, well, hold on once. And I said, well, can we open it so you can look at it? I said, if you open it, and you'll see what it is. It's just a book, you know. So she opened up. She goes, I'm not touching that. I said, they're just stories in there. They're like, because the test tubes looked really like there was chemical in there and stuff, because it was stained with that phosphorescent paint, you know. And she said, I'm not touching that. Hold on, we're gonna have to get. I'll be back or something. So now she comes with another clipboard, and she's wanting me to sign this piece of paper saying that I'm transporting radioactive substances. And I'm like telling her, I can't sign that. I'm not. There's like no substances in there. It's just an artist book. And my husband comes behind me, and he goes like, Susan, what's going on here? And I explained to him. He goes, just sign the form. Just sign the form. So I signed the form and get on the plane, and who knows? I'm probably on some
terrorist watch.
Watch for radioactive substances. It's pretty good, huh? But that's how real that book looked. I mean, and that was my goal. I wanted it to look like this really dangerous thing that you might have uncovered. And I read in my research that all of her notebooks, everything is still radioactive today. Did you know that?
No.
It's really scary if you go to the research laboratory. Yeah. So I wanted it to look like that. I wanted it to look like, oh my God, I'm not touching that, and it worked.
Too effective.
Yeah, it was effective.
So you've shown work internationally, both your books and your photography. Can you describe to us the response to your work internationally versus your Dallas audience?
Good question. My work has always done better outside of Dallas. In fact, I've had people buy my work in another state that live in Dallas.
Oh, really?
Which is really, I no longer am represented by this gallery in San Francisco, but Modern Book Gallery had a client who bought a piece. They were traveling in San Francisco and bought a piece there that they could have bought here. I don't quite get it. I mean that would be a whole nother conversation, right, of Dallas art collectors, but I think that I wouldn't say it today, but I think maybe when in the early color work, it was a lot about violence. It was cynical. It was fabricated images. People weren't fabricating images that much in the early 80s. I think it was a style of photography that people maybe didn't understand. I don't know. I had a show. I was in a show in Japan. I think it's called Women's Self-Portraits in the 80s. Yeah, that's the title of the show. Yeah. Cindy Sherman was in that show. And they bought the most difficult piece of all, and they have it in their collection. It's interesting. I don't know. Is that maybe what your question was? What the response has been? And even just
not even collector's response, but maybe just the person coming in and seeing the work, or even at your receptions, at international shows if you've been to those, and then how is the response by either other artists or between the international audience versus a local audience?
I'm thinking back to the early days of Dallas, because I wouldn't say it today. Is that like I have have a tremendous following today. Like, I think, you know, my show at Conduit was, I mean, standing room only, was packed. But I think it's a group of people that understand my work and maybe have followed the work. I don't know. I have always called myself a photographer, but I don't make photographs. I make images that are, you know, created. They don't exist in reality. And so, I don't know. Maybe the Dallas. I don't know. That's kind of a hard question. I think that response from an audience maybe has a lot to do with the education of the place the show is. Like, you know,
Absolutely.
How much press has there been? How much preparation has there been? Every place that the Dream Project showed in its tours, there's always been educational programming with it. In a lot of the early exhibitions of it, we had a panel discussion always with the sleep scientist, John Herman, myself, and then he would always look to see who in the community he knew in the sleep world, and then I would always look to see who else, like maybe the gallery that it was showing or the museum that it was in. We'd bring in sort of an art professional. I think that kind of stuff really helps a lot with perception. We did the same thing in Dallas when that big installation opened at 5501 Columbia. We did an evening with him and I, and it was really crowded. We did a thing for the Dallas Psychoanalytic Society.
Oh, cool.
And they were like just really fascinated by, you know, using that research to make art. I don't know if I'm answering your question or
No,
not.
I think you are.
So I think your question was, what's the difference between acceptance in other cities, maybe?
Yeah, responses versus, you know, other cities versus in Dallas. And I didn't know if you had noticed. You kind of answered it, I think, in the first round when you were talking about the ways in which Dallas collectors might go elsewhere to buy your work, or your work does well or does better outside of Dallas.
But you know, that's my question would probably come back to myself, like is that because they don't know who I am, or they, like, my gallery hasn't done the work, or and maybe in the beginning I didn't, you know, have the kind of following. I think it's changed over the years. I think, I mean, I think the Dallas art scene in all the spaces now, I mean, there's a good following. I think there's a group of people that, you know, follow, keep up with the arts. Don't you think that?
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
I mean,
there's
the openings are
ebbs and flows, and we're definitely on a high point, I think, or at least moving up.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, you know, there's also whole issues about the economy and all that really might tell you, but you know, I've never felt a lack of support, is what I would say. I wouldn't say that financially, because I make really expensive. It's expensive to keep a studio and make work, but I've never felt a lack of support in making the work. But I think that we maybe create that support in our own psyche, maybe, in a way.
What's kept you in Dallas for so long?
Oh my God, I can't believe I've been here this long. I have really great friends here. I have a great studio here, and I love teaching. It's a privilege to teach where I teach, and watch these people grow and you know, make something for their lives as artists. I don't know. It's not because of the environment. I mean, I really miss water. I miss mountains. You know, I didn't grow up with mountains, but I grew up on water. And I don't know. There's something about Dallas that really, it's easy to make work here. And I have really great artist friends here, you know, that are a great support, I think. I don't know. It's weird. I ask myself that a lot, you know. Yeah, why am I still here? And now, you know, in the last 5 years, 6 years, with like so much amazing architecture and so much, it's really changed. Like, I can't complain anymore. Like, when I teach in New York, I was just there, and when you know, people are like, oh my God, you know, Fort Worth Modern, and they like, people like really know about stuff that's happening here that wasn't like that 30 years ago.
Yeah. Can you think of any past exhibitions, either here at the museum or in local galleries, that you can remember as having been either influential to your own work or just allowed you to consider making your work in a different way?
Hmm. Gosh, there's so many. Where would I start that? That's a good question. I wish I knew that question ahead of time.
Oh, sorry.
What was the artist that was at 5501 Columbia that we just looked at?
Beverly Sims?
Yeah, Beverly Sims. That show just blew my mind.
Mhm.
That was a show that I could go back a million times and just stand in that space.
Mhm.
I just thought it was really, really amazing.
Mhm. That's a good one.
I mean, that one really stands out. I mean, there's so many. I can't think right now. I'm sorry. But all of it, I think that for me, I've always looked at lots of art. I mean, I go to, every month I go to the openings and go to the museum shows, and
Anything recently that surprised you in Dallas?
Well, I love the Cindy Sherman show. I mean, my favorite show are the room of centerfolds. Because I think it's because it takes me back to when I was doing those self-portrait, set up fabricated images. It's just, and it's nice to see such a big collection of that work all in one place where you've seen little pieces of it, over the years, and it's nice to see it all together.
It's true. You get spoiled by going into that room.
The other show I loved was at the Fort Worth Modern, the Kendridge show. William Kendridge.
Yeah.
That was amazing. That one, I mean, there's so many parts of that show, but that piece, that cylinder piece, that video that was spinning around that cylinder. I mean, I don't know how many times I went to it, but I loved that show.
It's funny that you say that, because in other interviews, there have been other artists who have referenced that show.
That show?
Yeah. So it must have.
Yeah, I love that show.
I don't think I didn't get to see it. I don't think I was here. What have you found to be the greatest challenge to having a career as an artist in Dallas?
The greatest challenge? For me, it's teaching full-time and running a program. I think all the time the amount of time and energy that goes into that I could be in my own studio. And I look at this notion of wasted time a lot, and wasted opportunities that in student work, and I watch the time go. I mean, I love being there when I'm there, but I think that's the biggest challenge. What would my second challenge be? Economics. Many times, there's a lot of projects I probably wish I could have taken on that I couldn't afford in photography. It's expensive. I think that's a challenge, is keeping within a budget that's manageable.
Right.
Framing pieces, buying equipment, etc.
And I have one final question, which I probably should have asked before, but off the top of your head, do you have a greatest memory or favorite story in relation to the contemporary arts community in Dallas?
Oh, a favorite story?
Yeah, or a memory, or something that you love to tell, or is something that you find yourself telling your friends over and over again?
I never think fast. That's my problem in life. A favorite story to the contemporary art scene.
Come back to it later.
Yeah.
You'll have to let me know.
Yeah, no, I will. I'll think about it.
You do, please. That'd be great.
Yeah, so it's a favorite story?
Favorite memory or something, anything that just sticks out in your mind over the years is kind of a moment when you still think about and laugh about.
I have one.
Oh, good.
I was on the artist advisory board of the MAC, and we curated this show called Gen X, and it was, all the artists were under 20, right? Is that, yeah. And our job, each of us, Andrea Rosenberg and I were on that. I can't remember who all else it was, but it was Andrea, myself, Rick Bertel. I can't remember the other people right now. I will in a minute. And so our job was to go and find artists, and then we would come back and we had all these meetings of, you know, I saw this artist, I think we should include this artist. We have these meetings all together. And so, and Rick, as you know, is, I mean, when he describes something, like you're just, like I mean, he's such a historian. I mean, he can describe something in such a way that you can see every little bit of it, and you're there with him. I mean, I just think he's amazing to listen to, you know. So he comes back, and we each give our little reports, and he comes in and he talks about this amazing painting, and it's this yellow painting, and it's amazing. And it just goes on and on about how we've got to have this painting, and by the end we all have to have this painting. We can't wait. Of course we want this painting. And I'm not going to say who it was, but so then when it comes time to hang the show, Andrea and I are the ones that are there helping install, and all the paintings are coming in, everything. It wasn't just painting, but all the work's coming in. Well, this yellow painting is nowhere, you know, to be found, and we're waiting, and then we go and eat something, we take a break, and like the artist, it doesn't come, and so, and we all are just waiting because this is going to be like the biggest star of the show. And finally this artist walks in and he brings this painting, and Andrea are like, what? That's, oh my God. We were like, just so, like, it didn't look anything like what we had built up in our mind over all these months, you know, waiting for it. So that's like one little magic.
That's a good one. Now I'm gonna be curious about who the artist
But you know,
is.
it speaks to the power of description. And of course, once it was hung and we all looked at it, we all loved it. But it didn't look like what we expected.
Sure.
It's like the experience as a teacher of, you know, students go out and make all these photographs, and they're in the experience of the photograph, and you're just looking at the photograph. like there's no experience there anymore, and it's so easy to not. It's hard to remove yourself from the experience. So, and it was like it was a moment. I'll go back. I'll find that now, so I could probably tell you what piece it was.
That'd be great. I'd love to.
Thank you.
Well, great. That's everything I have. Unless there's anything else you'd want to share with us.
That's good. I think we're good.
I think so too. Thank you so much.
Thank
Susan.
you
This
so
has been a
much.
great